Accentuating the positive to help people win. That is the name of this chapter, even though this book is not written chapters rather than titles. This is the second to last of the quote unquote chapters. Later that morning, the author knocked on the door of Herb's office. Herb obviously knew in advance that the author was coming because he looked up and said, "I understand you like to catch people doing things right." "I certainly do," replied the author. "I love the entrepreneur's idea that to really learn how to do something, you have to be willing to be coached and study under a master. But I feel the follow up system he got from his father, tell me, show me, let me, correct me, etc., doesn't accentuate the positive. He told me you confronted him on the lack of support and the learning system you use in the company now, which includes catching people doing things right. I'd be interested in learning about that." "Be happy to share what we're doing," said Herb. "First, let me give you a little background. We hire two kinds of people: winners and potential winners. Winners are people who are already experienced in what we have hired them to do and have a good performance track record. They don't need much help, do they?" guessed the author. "You're absolutely right," insisted Herb. "In their competency area, they are already up to speed. They merely need to understand our business and culture a little more if they are new to the organization, and they need to be clear on their goals. Plus, know what good behavior looks like," added the author. "Right," said Herb. "They need to know when they've hit a home run. Once they know about our business and are clear on our goals and standards, they don't have to be coached much anymore. Rather than master teachers, they need master cheerleaders." "Tell me about what you do with the potential winners you hire," said the author. "These are people we think can become winners if we properly train them," said Herb. "So you don't hire any losers, do you?" said the author with a smile. "No, we try to avoid that," said Herb with a laugh. "We want everyone to have a chance to win. With our potential winners, the big thing we want to check is whether they have a positive attitude toward learning." "I bet that means you check your winners for any stinking thinking, doesn't it?" asked the author. "It sure does," said Herb. "Phil insists that we give everyone we hire a checkup from the neck up and get rid of any stinking thinking. Once we know we have the right people on the bus, we zero in on our potential winners. First, we design our personalized training for them that includes some of our own offerings as well as trainings we contract from the outside. We want to jumpstart their learning." "Is that where you begin to implement your follow up system?" "Yes," said Herb. "With all the training we do, we want our people to go well beyond mere theory and knowledge. They must have opportunities to practice using what they are taught. When I got the go ahead from Phil, we changed our follow up learning system to tell me, show me, let me, observe me, praise my progress or redirect me. Tell me, show me, let me, observe me, praise my progress and or redirect me. I'm going to repeat that. Tell me, show me, let me, observe me, praise my progress and or redirect me. Tell me, show me, let me, observe me, praise my progress and or redirect me. You'll notice we've added one step, observe me, in addition to changing correct me to praise me and or redirect me, continued Herb. "That's so consistent with my thinking," said the author. "But to praise or redirect people, the manager has to be around." "You're right. To praise or redirect people, managers have to be around to observe people's progress," said Herb. "In the old days, when people were learning, they worked alongside a master. Everything they did was observed by the master. Today, in the world of work, things are moving so fast that managers are often not around when their people are first trying to use their new knowledge." I'm going to repeat that statement because it was highlighted. Today, in the world of work, things are moving so fast that managers often are not around when their people are first trying to use their new knowledge. And that leads to managerial seagull behavior. said the author with a smile. When the learner makes a mistake, particularly if it reflects on the manager in the department, the manager flies in, makes a lot of noise, dumps on the learner, and then flies out. I never quite heard it expressed that way, said Herb with a laugh. That's what we want to avoid. We want our master teachers, whether they are managers or not, to work closely with potential winners, particularly when they are first trying to do what they've been taught. Does a person's manager always have to be a master teacher when that person is learning a new skill? Not always, said Herb, but it is responsibility of the manager to make sure every one of their people has a teacher or coach if they need it. People management certainly takes a lot of time and effort, doesn't it? Said the author. It does, and it should, said Herb. But let me explain a few things. The most critical periods are when people have just been to training or are attempting to do something new. Too often, when people are sent to training, when they get back, nobody knows or cares that they have been gone. As a result, their workload piles up during their absence, and there is little time to focus on applying what they have been taught, particularly in a non technical area like leadership or team building, or a skill area like listening and praising. Since we don't send people to a lot of training in our company and want them to learn less, we want to get a bang for our buck. So you really focus on managing and coaching after training, said the author? Yes. One other thing that's important to know is that you don't tell me, show me, let me, observe me, praise my progress and or redirect me forever. Over time, your teaching style should noticeably move to ask me, let me, show you so you can observe me, and then praise me. And eventually, said the author, it should move to tell myself, perform, and praise or redirect my own progress. Absolutely, said Herb. Eventually, you want learners to become masters in what they do so they can handle a delegating leadership style where their managers lets them run with the ball. They can manage themselves as well as coach others. I can see you don't have closing the knowing doing gap to chance. I can see you don't leave the closing can see you don't leave closing the knowing doing gap to chance, said the author. When I talked to Phil, he said there were three key ingredients to an effective follow up plan: structure, support, and accountability. It seems to me that all three are involved in your follow up learning system. Absolutely, said Herb. Through Phil's influence, we've learned that being an effective teacher or manager is more of a discipline than an art. When it comes to helping people put their know how into action, this is where all three ingredients have to be present. So that's all it takes to close the knowing doing gap. A simple follow up plan? Asked the author. New chapter: providing more structure, support, and accountability. Yes and no, said Herb. I'm sure Phil told you that the third reason people don't do what they know, lack of follow up, is the toughest hurdle to overcome. So we have several follow up systems to make sure that people act on what they know. The author got out of his notebook. To those who are listening, I am reading text messages. My apologies. The author got out his notebook, sensing that this might be some of the most valuable information he'd heard yet. I'll give you two examples, Herb continued. First, we have implemented a one on one process in our organization. We require every manager to meet once every 2 weeks with each of his or her direct reports for 15 to 30 minutes. Who sets the agenda? Asked the author. The direct report, said Herb. It usually focuses on how they are doing on their goals and what, if any, help they need. But direct reports can discuss anything they want. It's their meeting. That's real support, said the author. It also provides structure and accountability, said Herb. Since managers meet 26 times a year with each of their direct reports, that provides plenty of structure. Because of these frequent meetings, when it comes to an annual performance review, there are no surprises. Accountability is built into the one on one process. and that has a tremendous impact on our company's performance and the retention of good people. How did you get managers to do one on ones? Asked the author. That's quite a commitment of time and energy. Repetition, 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 replied Herb. Phil is almost like a third grader. He says over and over again how important our one-on-one meetings are. It's like water torture. He also rewards those managers and direct reporters who are holding these meetings. Both? Absolutely, said Herb. We don't permit our people to place the blame for things not happening up the hierarchy. Managing people is a partnership. So about 20% of everyone's performance evaluation is focused on their one-on-one meetings. That's a departure from the customary top-down management style, said the author. Yes, but we think it's necessary in order to close the knowing doing gap and have a high-performing organization. You said you had a second example of the kind of structure and accountability you provide, said the author. We do, said Herb. We believe in the power of outside coaches. For a minimum of 6 weeks after a major training program, he assigned every participant a telephone coach. These are people certified as coaches who do not work at our company. As a result, they are not emotionally involved in the day to day pressures facing our people. All they are interested in is helping close our post seminar knowing doing gap. I would imagine that's extremely helpful, said the author. It is, said Herb. We found that after our leadership training programs, if participants have telephoned coaching sessions for 50 minutes once a week for 6 weeks within an outside coach, they get the structure, support, and accountability they need. And we get the results we want. Adding one-on-one meetings to the mix is a powerful one to follow a punch to help people use what they've been taught. When people use what they've been taught and hit their goals and targets, everyone wins. The author thanked Herb for his time as he headed back to the entrepreneur's office for one last visit. His thoughts turned to his golf game. To improve, he knew that even if he went to Danny's golf school, he would need some kind of follow-up plan. Maybe that's something he could teach Mr. Know-It-All, so his friends didn't slowly start to revert to old habits. No matter how great the school was, a follow-up plan is essential. Realizing the power of what he'd just been told by Herb, the author stopped to jot down some notes in clear, readable handwriting. This is what he wrote. Reasons why people don't put their know-how into action number 3, lack of follow-up. Successful people yearn to learn and have a follow-up plan for learning. Doing what we've been taught cannot be left to chance. A follow-up plan that provides structure, support, and accountability must be set up to help us behave on our good intentions. The sequence of tell me, show me, let me, observe me, and praise my progress or redirect me is a simple but powerful follow-up plan that helps potential winners become winners. Accentuating the positive helps learners become eager beavers. Praising progress is important before redirecting or correcting takes place. Over time, learners should be able to praise and redirect themselves. One-on-one meetings and outside telephone coachings are also helpful vehicles for closing the knowing doing gap. When the author approached the entrepreneur's office, Phil Murray was out front talking to Evelyn. He looked up and smiled. I bet you feel a lot better now that you know our follow-up system is more positive. I do, said the author as they entered Phil's office together. Are the principles of providing structure, support, and accountability the most important aspects of closing the knowing doing gap? The author asked. In many ways they are, replied the entrepreneur. But remember that our follow-up system builds on the first 2 reasons that we discussed: information overload and negative filtering. Until you decide to focus on a few things to learn and get rid of your stinking thinking, our positive follow-up system will not have as much impact. Yet it is the bridge that connects the knowing doing gap and makes our programs successful. I get it now, said the author. Few people will ever change by reading a book, listening to an audio, watching a video, or attending a one-time seminar. You have to roll up your sleeves and become a focused learner. Then you have to filter the new information through a positive mindset. And finally, you have to have a plan for putting your new knowledge into practice right away. That's a good summary, said Phil. Let me share one last thing. There's a golden thread that runs through the life of every high achiever. It is the golden thread of focus backed by persistence. In one way or another, every person of extraordinary accomplishment has the ability to focus on a target with a laser like intensity, staying on course to achieve the goal. That's what I'm worried about, my own ability to focus and follow up, said the author. I'm concerned that I won't be able to stick with what you've taught me. I feel like I need a master teacher who can coach me and give me the structure, support, and accountability I need. Phil smiled brightly. I never thought you'd ask. Why don't we check with each other once every 2 weeks for 15 to 30 minutes on the telephone so you can share with me how you're doing and what additional help you need? So you're willing to do one on ones with me? Yes, I am, said Phil. If you promise me one thing, what's that? Asked the author. Promise me that once you've been able to implement all the things we've talked about, you are focused on a few things to learn. You have an open mind and you have a clear follow up plan. You will share what you've learned and teach others. I'm going to repeat that. Share what you learn and repeat others. Share what you learn and teach others, excuse me. Okay, that seems to be the end of the book here. We are now going to be going into the epilogue. Phil and the author kept in contact through their biweekly telephone calls. The author shared with him everything that was happening in his life, including reports about his time at the golf school his friend Denny and had recommended. They spent two calls designing his follow-up plan. They spent two calls designing his follow-up plan, so that would not revert back to his old golfing habits. These discussions reminded them both that closing the knowing doing gap has no boundaries. It can impact every part of one's life. During one of their calls, the author invited Phil to sit in a conversation speech he was giving in town. Phil jumped at the opportunity, particularly when the author told him the title of his speech was Putting Your Know How into Action. What a great topic, Phil said to the author. Did you ever think of calling your speech No Can Do? Not until you mentioned it, said the author with a laugh. But I realized that teaching others what I know is one of the best ways to begin to apply new knowledge. And that process deepens my commitment to putting my know how into action. That's right, Phil replied. Closing the knowing doing gap is more action than words. Several weeks later, then, when Phil arrived at the convention center, the organizers had a name tag for him at the registration desk. He found out that this was an annual gathering of ASTD, an international organization of people in the training and development field. A perfect audience for closing the knowing doing gap, thought the entrepreneur. When Phil entered the convention hall, it was already jammed with people. The author's speech was the opening keynote for the convention. Phil guessed there were several thousands of people in the attendance. He wandered down the aisle and smiled when he found a seat near the front. He firmly believed that people who sat in the front of the class always learned more. After some opening music and fanfare, the president of ASTD entered the stage from the rear and made his way to the podium. He welcomed everyone and talked about some major highlights of the convention. Then he turned his attention to introducing the author. Even Phil was impressed with the author's credentials. He learned some new things about his friend. After a polite welcoming applause, the author moved to center stage. He smiled as he thanked the president for his kind introduction. My father would have enjoyed it, and my mother would have believed it, he quipped. Getting serious, the author opened his remarks. We have a crisis in our training and development field. What we teach is seldom practiced or used. People today know a lot more about leadership and management than anyone ever sees. The gap between knowing and doing is probably wider than the gap between ignorance and knowledge. This bothered me for a long time until I recently learned about the missing link: repetition, repetition, repetition. That's what I want to share with you this morning. In our field, for years we have defined learning as a change in behavior, yet we have not agreed on how to make this happen. We all know change is not easy, particularly changing one's own behavior. There are actually three levels of change when you move from knowing something to doing something. The first level of change is at the knowledge level. It is the easiest and the least time consuming thing to change in people. All you have to do is read a new book, listen to new audio, watch a new video, or go to a new seminar. So it's very attractive. That leads to the first reason why people don't do what they know. It's more fun to learn something new than to struggle to do what you know. As a result, we have information overload. we're drowning in a sea of information. But unlike a fish, we don't have a built in monitoring system that can take from the water what we need and leave what we don't. What's the answer here? It's repetition, repetition, repetition. We have to focus our energy on a few things rather than a lot of things. How many diets does it take to lose weight? Only the one you stick to. We have to stop always looking for the next new management concepts and the follow up on the one we just taught people. I'll never forget being asked to speak to all the managers in a company. The president wouldn't let me on the stage, though, until I had come to their corporate headquarters and found out what they had already been teaching these leaders. He told me, I want you to build on what we have been teaching, not send us off in a new direction. In reflecting on my experience with the president, I realized how important top management support is in closing the knowing doing gap. He was a strict stickler for focusing on people's energy. He even went as far as asking every person in the company to identify one thing they would be able to add to their resume next year that hadn't been there that previous year. He thought everyone should learn something new every year, not a lot of things every year. So, the key to overcoming the first reason why people don't do what they know, information overload, is to apply the less, more philosophy. Focus on less and repeat it again and again. Focus, focus. The words were just flowing out of the author. His command of the subject surprised even him. I hope I can help them put this good stuff into action, he thought. Then he had an idea. Before I tell you about the second level of change, the author continued, let me ask you to do a couple of things. Stand up, all of you. As the crowd got to their feet, the author said, I'm going to ask you to do two things. First, I'd like you to do is wander around this hall for about 30 seconds and greet as many people as you possibly can. But greet them in a special way. Greet them as if they are insignificant and you are looking for someone much more important to talk to. After everyone laughed, they began to wander around the hall, ignoring each other. After a while, the author shouted out, stop where you are, but don't sit down. When the crowd had quieted down, the author said, now wander around for another 30 seconds, but this time greet people as if they are long lost friends and you are glad to see them. With that, a tremendous burst of energy filled the hall as people laughed, smiled, and hugged each other. After a while, the author shouted, you can all sit down now. When the crowd was finally settled, he smiled and said, why do you think I asked you to do that, besides the fact that I'm from California? Pretty soon, we'll be bringing in some hot tubs. Everyone laughed. Seriously, said the author, the reason I had you do those two exercises was to show you that to be a great leader and successful person, you need to know how to manage people's energy, including your own. Of the two activities I put you through, which one created more energy in the room? Everyone shouted out, the second activity. With that, the author said, what did I do to change that energy in the room? All I did was change what you were thinking about from a negative thought, these are unimportant people, to a positive thought, these are long lost friends who I'm really glad to see. With that, the whole energy in the room changed. How many of you know the computer and the brain have a lot in common? Asked the author. A few tentative hands went up. Both the computer and the brain don't know the difference between the truth and what you tell them. When you put information in a computer, it doesn't say, where did you get those facts? Those facts are wrong. The computer does whatever it can with the information you give it. For years, we've said that about the computer. Garbage in, the crowd yelled. Garbage out. Absolutely, said the author. The brain is the same way. It doesn't know the difference between the truth and what you tell it. Suppose you got up this morning, looked in the mirror, and said, you're fabulous. Your brain wouldn't say, you've got to be kidding. I know you better than that. The crowd roared. You see, the author, successful people know how to program their minds in positive ways. This leads me to the second level of change that we have to go through if we are to believe differently. It's called attitudinal change. An attitude is an emotional charged bit of knowledge. It's when you feel strongly in a positive or negative way towards something that you know. Attitudes are tougher to change than knowledge because you can say, I know what you're saying, but that's why we have to get rid of people's thinking by dealing with their negative filtering system. The second reason people don't do what they don't know, don't do what they know. We do this by helping them develop a positive filtering system without an open mind, open attitude toward learning. You're never going to close a knowing doing gap, the author paused. Take a drink from the water glass on the podium. Most of us, he continued, when we sit in an audience like today, are skeptical. Why? Because as we grow up and as we are growing up, our parents and other adults tended to accent the negative rather than the positive. When we had an idea we were excited about, they usually threw a wet blanket on it. As a result, we started to adopt that way of thinking too. What we all need to huh, okay, let's take a little pause here. That's mostly the book there. We get the idea, right? Hope you guys enjoyed. I may finish the last 2 pages. Thank you very much.